Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're taking on a really fascinating intellectual challenge. We're not doing a deep dive into Christianity or Islam or Buddhism. Instead, we're looking at the academic study of religion itself, what scholars call Religionswissenschaft.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate meta-study, really, analyzing the concepts, the theories, the very tools used to even begin to understand one of humanity's most complex phenomena.
And that's exactly the mission for you, the listener. The core challenge here is understanding not just what people think religion is, but how the modern concept of religion and its twin, the secular, was actually built.
Right.
How it was defined, how it traveled the globe, and how it's still debated. It's about learning to see the world through a whole new set of conceptual glasses.
And that's so important. Religious studies is pretty unique because it intentionally works across every cultural line you can imagine, East and West, past and present. It touches everything: ethics, history, gender, politics. But here's the crucial part, the big distinction. The academic discipline never, ever tests the truth claims of faith.
That's absolutely right. The field never asks, is this true? It asks, how do people interpret the world so fundamentally differently? And gaining that competence, that ability to map these different worldviews, that is essential for you to orient yourself in the world we live in today.
Okay, let's unpack this then, starting with the building blocks. When the academic field first tried to define its object of study, it needed a big, clear model. What was that classic early approach?
We have to start with the anthropological classic, Clifford Geertz. He defined religion as a powerful symbol system.
A symbol system.
And crucially, a cultural system. Geertz basically made religion available for scientific study by treating it as culture, something you could, grasp the internal logic of.
And his big idea hinges on these two types of patterns that religion provides. How did he split the job of a symbol system?
He drew this brilliant, crucial line between the two ways symbols work. First, they act as models of reality.
Okay, models of, like a blueprint.
Exactly. It explains the world you're in. It's your creation story, your map of the cosmos.
And the second one?
The second is that they are models for action. This is your instruction manual. It tells you how to behave like a dietary law or, the 10 Commandments.
So religion is like a dual operating system. It gives you both the theory for the universe and the practical guide for how to live in it.
Precisely. And the appeal of this definition was, it was immense. It established religion as its own thing, an autonomous subject.
You couldn't just reduce it to psychology or economics.
Right. You couldn't just say, oh, religion is just a crutch or it's just a mask for class struggle. It was its own irreducible system of meaning.
The meaning can't be the whole story, can it? So introduce the critique that challenged Geertz's intense focus on symbols and belief.
Yeah, this is where you get the post-structuralist critiques, most famously from scholars like Talal Asad. The core argument is that Geertz focused way too much on the conceptual side.
On meaning and belief.
On meaning and belief, what they call the primacy of meaning. By focusing on what people believe, he kind of neglected the practical, lived practices and, even more critically, the power structures underneath it all.
So it was all about what people think is true, not who gets to tell them what's true or how those beliefs are enforced.
Exactly. The critics said, look, this universal definition of religion is often, unconsciously shaped by a Protestant Christianity, which really privileges theology and individual faith.
So what was the alternative focus?
The alternative focus is discourse.
Okay, discourse is a word I feel like people throw around a lot. What does it mean in this very specific context?
It's much more specific than just talk. Discourse is the whole system of language and practices that produce meanings. And it's understood as completely inseparable from arrangements of power. So think of it this way. The actual words we use, faith, ritual, those words carry the weight of the political history that created them. The very concept of religion with a capital R, it emerged right alongside colonial structures.
That is a phenomenal shift. So if Geertz gives us the mental map, we need social theory to figure out who drew the map and why. Let's move from the abstract to the structured community and talk about power within religious life using Pierre Bourdieu.
Bourdieu, yes. The great French sociologist. He taught us how power works, often invisibly, with his concept of the religious field.
The religious field.
He saw society as a bunch of these semi-independent arenas, or fields: law, politics, science, religion, and each one operates with its own specific rules of the game.
So it's like the NBA, but for holiness. Everyone agrees on the basic rules, the sacred text, the ritual, but they're all competing for influence inside that arena.
Precisely. And within that field, actors compete for capital. And sociologically, capital is just any resource that lets you exert influence.
So not just money.
No. In the religious field, it's social capital, your relationships. It's cultural capital, like having a theology degree, and especially symbolic capital, which is the prestige, the legitimacy that is recognized within that specific field.
So it's not enough to just be devout. You have to be seen as legitimate by the community's gatekeepers to have any real power.
Absolutely. The field perspective focuses on these objective relations, the power dynamics. It's all about how actors constantly compete to define the boundaries of that religion.
Okay, so once we understand that internal competition, we have to connect it to the negotiation that happens outside, between the religious and the secular. This is where religious secularization comes in.
This is such a crucial insight for you to grasp. Religious secularization is the realization that the religious and the secular basically create each other.
They're mutually constitutive.
Exactly. Defining one automatically defines the other. This isn't just about separation, it's about definition. When you define what is secular, you are inherently constraining and shaping what religious is allowed to be.
And the specific act of drawing that line, that's called religionization.
Correct. Religionization is that explicit process of marking certain practices or traditions as religious to distinguish them from the secular.
Could you give us a concrete historical example of this separation being deliberately constructed?
For sure. We can look at religiosecularism as an ideological project. Take the Egyptian scholar Ali Abdal-Razik back in 1925.
Okay.
The caliphate was collapsing, and he argued for a really clear separation in Islam between prophetic, religious leadership and, political leadership, the sultanate, the world.
So he was basically creating a modern definition of Islam that restricted it to the spiritual and social realm and took away its political function.
Exactly. His argument defined religion as private and unpolitical. It's a perfect illustration of how modern separationist discourse actively creates and limits the scope of religion.
And this process of defining and separating and conserving the religious leads us to a fascinating object that shows the physical remnants of this. Tell us about the amulet.
Yeah, we have this example of an amulet against the evil eye from Israel collected in 1934. It's a protection document that pulls together this whole established religious repertoire.
The hand, the Star of David.
Right. Divine names, Torah quotes, all for this very practical purpose of protection.
But the insight here isn't the magic, it's the moment it was collected.
Precisely. The curator acquired it because they felt that belief in this kind of protection was rapidly declining because of modern secularizing pressures. The artifact's value wasn't its power, but its perceived endangerment.
So the very act of putting it in a museum was part of this conservation project, preserving something that was seen as vanishing under the march of progress.
That's the material consequence of religiosecularization. The museum is actively drawing the boundary between rational progress and this vanishing tradition, and then it tries to preserve the vanishing side.
Wow, that's a powerful point. These categories we use, they were constructed locally, but they traveled the globe, especially during colonialism. So how did these categories land and change outside of Europe? Let's talk about entangled histories.
Absolutely. The key mistake here is to think that colonized peoples were just passive recipients of Western ideas. Far from it. Look at the debates over the science of religion in the 19th century colonial world.
Okay, give us an example of someone pushing back.
Well, consider the case of Raj Narayan, part of the Brahmo Samaj in Bengal, India. He was deeply engaged with the Western founders of the field, like Max Miller.
So he read their work.
He read it, he cited it, but he used their own methods not to adopt their views, but to argue for the superiority of Hinduism, using the very tools of Western research.
That's a magnificent reversal, using the colonizers' own scientific framework against them as a kind of nationalist, anti-colonial move.
It shows that knowledge production was a competition. Miller himself knew this. He actually warned European scholars that if they hesitated, other nations and other faiths would take over the work. The definition of religion was a global, contested project right from the start.
Okay, so if that's the historical flow, let's jump to the present. How does globalization and migration change religion today?
We can analyze this through the lens of diaspora. When a tradition scatters across the world, it creates this transnational religious space. And that space acts as a genuine laboratory of religious innovation.
Why a laboratory?
Because the old structures are disrupted, people are forced to find new solutions to new problems.
So that's a modern invention that's come out of that situation.
The rise of the cyber mufti. These are Islamic legal scholars who give rulings, or fatwas, online. And critically, these rulings are often explicitly designed to make religious life possible for Muslims living in non-Muslim Western countries.
So they're solving real-world problems, like how do I navigate banking laws or dietary rules in a secular society? They're creating a new, dynamic legal tradition.
That's innovation in action. They're trying to help people retain their religious and cultural distinctiveness without creating conflict with the host society.
We also need to talk about concepts that came from non-Western scholars trying to build their own frameworks.
How?
Tell us about African traditional religion.
That brings us to African traditional religion, or ATR. Now, it's crucial to understand that ATR is a scholarly model. It's not just a catch-all term for every religion in Africa.
Right.
It actually emerged among post-independence African scholars like Balaji Idowu, who were influenced by Pan-African and nationalist ideas.
And why did they need a single unifying concept like that?
Because colonialism often just dismissed indigenous practices as primitive, as folklore. Idowu and others needed this high-level concept ATR to assert a distinct, sophisticated African spiritual heritage in academic and public life. It was a conceptual tool for decolonization.
Okay, so for our final section, let's shift to the academic tools scholars use to interpret all this. Let's start with how we even understand language itself, metaphorology.
Right. What's so fascinating here is that the philosopher Hans Blumenberg argued that metaphors are not just, pretty linguistic decoration. They are tools that base a comparison on a claimed similarity, like calling the political system the state ship.
It's powerful because it suggests the complexity of a state can be understood with a familiar object, like a ship.
Yeah.
It gives the idea immediate weight.
And that's why they work so well. They actually structure our thinking. Blumenberg said they're essential for the readability of religion because they provide orientation and, huge cosmological ideas. They offer this immediate high plausibility.
So let's apply one of these tools to a huge religious theme, the end of time, what scholars call millennialism.
Millennialism, or millenarianism, is the belief in an imminent transition to a collective state of salvation or well-being.
Earthly or heavenly.
Either one, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's structured by some kind of transcendent blueprint or divine plan.
And we can break this down into two basic types that help us categorize a huge range of movements. What's the loud one?
Yes. First, you have catastrophic millennialism. This is transformation through, cataclysmic, world-destroying events. The old world has to be burned down so a new, better one can rise from the ashes.
When I hear political commentators calling for a complete system overhaul, I realize now they're sort of channeling that catastrophic mindset.
Yeah.
Just secularized.
Precisely. The structure of the expectation is the key. And the second type is progressive millennialism. This is a gradual, step-by-step transformation without the world-ending events.
So the millennium is the end result of slow societal and spiritual change. A steady march toward betterment.
Exactly.
Finally, let's turn the lens back on the act of writing history itself. Religionsgeschichte. How do scholars avoid just telling the story of the winners?
Writing religious history requires deep self-reflection, because any historical account is always shaped by narrative strategies, by narratology. If you only rely on texts from the powerful and the literate, you're inherently reflecting their perspective.
And marginalizing non-literate groups or women's experiences.
Of course.
So how do we move beyond those simple linear histories?
One advanced tool is the metaphor of the rhizome. Think of a rhizome as a root network that grows horizontally underground. The connections you see on the surface, the official institutions, the famous leaders, are just a tiny fraction of the total woven reality of history.
So it emphasizes complexity and connections over a single central story.
Exactly. It helps scholars map these complex global histories without assuming there's a single center or a rigid hierarchy.
So let's tie this all together. What's the big picture?
The big picture is this. We've looked at how religion is understood not as some singular, eternal thing, but as, a stable system of symbols, like Geertz saw it.
Right.
A dynamic field of power relations, like Bourdieu described. And as a flexible, contested concept that traveled the globe, constantly being redefined by all kinds of actors, local, colonial, transnational, all of whom rely on the basic tools of narrative and metaphor.
And understanding these layers, the cultural frame, the power struggle, the global flow, that allows you to deconstruct contemporary debates about religion, politics, and the secular in your own world. It's the map you need for a deeply complex, polarized environment.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought to leave you with.
Okay, hit us with it.
The separation of church and state secularism, it's often presented as this neutral, objective framework, right?
Yeah, the modern default setting.
But some scholars argue that this model is historically indebted to older Christian doctrines, specifically the idea of the two kingdoms, which separates the spiritual and the earthly realms. So the question is, what does it mean for modern public life if the very concept designed to separate religion from politics is itself an inheritance from theology? Think about that the next time you hear a debate about secularity.
That is a fascinating question about the very roots of our modern politics.
Yeah.
Another successful deep dive. Thank you for joining us.